So I have a lot of custom charts to show you tonight, woven in amongst this PowerPoint presentation, and I'm sure there'll be requests for copies of them. I will do my best to try and get them up on Chart Exchange as soon as possible, but I'm running flat out with some grant deadlines these days, so it may take a little bit. And there are some other pieces of the puzzle that need to fall into place as well with some of them before they can go out. Individual as an athlete, or perhaps another individual that you're coaching. And I've loosely organized the examples that I'm sharing with you around 3 questions here. Basically, who are you, which is really sort of a spot check of your characteristics at a given point in time. So descriptive of you. Secondly, to try and show you ways of looking at the data that would allow you to gain insight into how you respond to training. And not everybody necessarily responds the same way quantitatively or qualitatively, but by looking at your data and using the analytical tools that WKO4 provides, you may be able to gain important actionable intelligence that could be useful going forward. And then finally, talking a little bit about how should you train. Now obviously that's related to who you are, how you respond to training, but also your target events. And since I don't know what your target events are, it's a little bit difficult for me to talk about specifics in that context. And 2 and 3 are sort of blurred together in a way. But there is a subtle distinction in some sense in that you may respond really well to a particular type of training, yet not really want to spend a lot of time on that because it's not a key part of your own performance. But I wanted to try and provide a little bit of guideposts here rather than just throw slide after slide after slide at people, which is what I like to do. So starting with the ways in which WKO4 can be used to gain insight into who you are. A lot of this, not all of it, is based off of the power duration model, which was introduced with some webinars a couple years ago now. The power duration model actually is a bit of a Swiss Army knife in that it allows you to do a lot of things. So we're really just starting to get into that now, and there will be more to come in the future. And there are lots of ways you can actually plot this, but this is my preferred way. You'll notice all of my charts and reports, I've labeled them with my own name. That's not because I'm egotistical. That's so that when I go to search for them with the chart picker, they're easy for me to find. But here is the power duration curve, my actual mean maximal power data shown in yellow, the fitted line shown in red there. Down here, the solid gray line is 95% of my best 20-minute power in the last 90 days, and the dashed line is the model-derived FTP. So you can see for me they agree almost exactly. And again, this is for the last 90 days, which is the reporting period that is used by default for the so-called hero metrics up top. So at the present time, my estimated Pmax is all of 703 watts. My estimated RC is 10.6 kilojoules. My estimated FTP is 254 watts. And I've got my set FTP at 260 because until I got sick about a week or so ago, I just started to do some 2x20s at 260. So it looks like the model derived and my other approach are agreeing there within 6 watts, which would be what, about 2% or so. And then the variability or the uncertainty of the parameter estimates I've included on the face of my figure here because I like to see those as well. So as just at first blush already you can see how this may tell you something about yourself you may not know. You may be have been estimating your FTP a particular way and overestimating or underestimating it. You may have really no clue what your potential is at shorter durations because you've never tested it or measured it, or you've done 1-minute tests and have put it onto the classic power profiling tables, but that's based on just what you can do for 1 minute. And maybe that's a particular strength for you, maybe that's a particular weakness for you. And the Pmax also comes in handy in that many people just end up looking at what their power meter tells them, and a lot of power meters have problems reporting power precisely and accurately over short durations, at least periodically. And so they may think that their maximal neuromuscular power is, say 1200 watts, but then if you actually plot out their data, what you discover is that that's a single point way up here that is clearly artifact, and that if you actually look at it, there should be on a log plot, there should be a bit of a plateau here. There shouldn't be a sudden drop off in the first handful of seconds. Fortunately, by modeling the data, even if you do have an artifactual point, it tends to mitigate that a little bit. But nonetheless, it is important to go back and weed out those dandelions of bad data so they don't distort the results. Now, another way of looking at the same data, which provides further insight, is to compare your power duration curve against that of standard curves that we've included in the software, in the program. And the only thing that's really changed here is the gray standards are included now, but then that had to be rescaled to account for those who, in the world class, can produce 25 watts per kilogram and above for a Pmax value. So it should be pretty obvious that I'm a pathetic sprinter right now, especially, and I only really start to get going, out here after several minutes. In which case I fall at least these days in my recovery mode, I'm sort of on right along the border between good and very good at the aerobic durations. So weaknesses, relatively speaking, strengths, and then in between. Maybe you already know about yourself, maybe you don't, but the one benefit of WKO4 now, though, is we are using all durations. So it's really power duration profiling and not just power profiling. So we've gone from power profiling based on 4 durations to fatigue profiling based on 12 durations to power duration profiling based on every single point time point that you collect. Now, sometimes these curves can get kind of close together and it can be hard to read. So another way of looking at the same data is to try and flatten that curve. And credit here goes to Hunter and Kevin for this innovation, where basically your performance is expressed relative to the untrained, the upper level of the untrained standard. And here in the solid line, this is the overall average ranking, if you want to think of it that way. And so I'm below average up to 3 minutes and 34 seconds and above average, I'm worse than an untrained person, typical untrained person, up to 3 minutes 34 seconds, and better at longer durations. And then I've shown here it's like 50% below, 25% below, 25% above, 50% above. So another way really of just trying to visualize strengths and weaknesses, but if you compare it to that prior graph, things are sort of magnified, and I think it becomes a little more evident. Now, one of the nice things about WKO4 is you can manipulate the data a lot of different ways. So here is the WAC score, which stands for Williams Allen Coggan score, because it was Kevin who first suggested that there ought to be some way of flattening the PD curve so that a horizontal line would represent equal performance ability across all durations. And it was Hunter who said, yeah, I think that would be really helpful. And it was his enthusiasm that, kept it going. And I take credit. I calculated this the same way that the Mercier score is calculated in running, and that is it's expressed relative to world-class performance. So you can think of the WAC score here as your power at a particular duration as a percentage of what it takes to make it into the world-class range. So again, a way of trying to magnify differences, and you can see I'm weak at short durations, better at longer durations. And then just for fun and grins and giggles and bragging rights, again, because you have the ability to manipulate the data as you wish within WKO4, I've also calculated an age-adjusted WAC score, which assumes that I started falling off 1% per year at age 30, if you want to use that as a rough rule of thumb. So you might look at it, I've got it positioned out here over, bottom part's cut off, but positioned out over about FTP. So yeah, taking into consideration my age, I'm about 80% of world-class performance. Well, actually I'm only about 63% as good, but I like to take credit for, the gray hairs, and it's fun. So again, just another way of trying to focus on what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. Extending that further, it's possible to type or phenotype somebody, which is something that's it's based on an advanced statistical analysis of the shape of your power duration curve. And here I've turned it into a report. And in my case, it's not particularly exciting because my phenotype is so much that of a time trialist that even when I train for other events, I'm still a time trialist. But in other cases, people's phenotype will flip back and forth depending upon the focus of their training. And in fact, Hunter jokingly sent me a screenshot from WKO4 where he said he had the chameleon phenotype because he was able to shift himself between sprinter, TTer, and all-rounder depending on the focus of his training. Now, this is similar to what has always been done since the power profiling tables were developed, but with the added benefit, twofold, of relying upon all of your data and not just for semi-arbitrarily chosen durations. But the other benefit to it is that it's a subjective, or sorry, it's an objective statistical analysis. And we plan to develop this more into the future. So no more trying to read the tea leaves, or if you have kids who have watched WKO4, no more trying to look for the Grimhold in the teacup I can't remember who the divination teacher was in Harry Potter. Well, continuing that even further, relying upon, in part, the power duration curve, but other information as well, you can even start to make some estimates of people's physiological parameters. Now, I'm an exercise physiologist by training, so I kind of, this kind of stuff I find really interesting, but I'm also the person who coined the saying, the best predictor of performance is performance itself. So really that's what matters the most, how much power you can make and for what duration, and trying to make more power for relevant durations. But sometimes achieving that goal can be aided by having information about somebody's actual physiology gained either by submitting themselves to laboratory-based testing, or in the case of WKO4, we can make some estimates of those things. So you can see here's a list over the 15 plus years I've been, or the 15 years of data that I have on myself. My estimated VO2 max here, when I was 40-ish, running, mid to upper 60s, and then maybe starting to trend downward a little bit, and then now, injury and haven't really trained much for a little over a year, down to 56. So I'm going to have to start getting getting on the ball here if I'm going to achieve my goal of having a VO2 max of 60 at age 60. But hopefully we'll be able to get back to that point. And down here is my estimated muscle fiber type. In my youth, based on multiple muscle biopsies, I was 75 to 80% type 1 in the vastus lateralis. The estimated fiber type here is falling along in those ranges. Although you can see there is some variability, 50 and 88%. Obviously, this is not as precise as taking a muscle biopsy. Not that taking muscle biopsies is all that precise either for determining fiber type, but at least it's in the right range of what you would expect. We can also use the power duration curve along with other knowledge to calculate an individualized elevation corrected power that takes into consideration your individual physiology and the impact that elevation or altitude would have upon that. This is data from the recent USA Challenge. Is that what the name of the stage race was out in Colorado? From Lachlan Norris. And I don't know the exact details of this particular file. This is something I snagged from Hunter because around here we don't have elevation, so I can't use my own data to illustrate this calculation. So down at the bottom is the blog post where Hunter explains exactly what was going on, which stage this is from, etc. But what you can see is the actual power is the gray values, and then the elevation corrected power, or the sea level equivalent power, is shown in yellow. And down below in the report, you can see for the entire stage, average power was 187, but the elevation corrected power was 205. But the magnitude of the correction varies depending upon where the what was happening during the race. So again, I'll just refer you to that link if you want to learn more about elevation corrected power, something that's in the pipeline because it has further ramifications when we start talking about elevation corrected FTP and how do you deal with calculation of TSS, etc. Now, like I said, the power duration curve is a bit of a Swiss Army knife, and you can do a lot of calculations based on it, and I'll be coming back to that later on. But that's not the only new thing that you will find within WKO4 that will tell you a little bit about who you are. In particular, there are some new pedaling metrics for those who have true dual-sided power meters that we believe provide a more honest picture of exactly how it is you pedal. These include, but aren't limited to, gross power released, or GPR, the gross power absorbed, or GPA, and kurtotic index, or KI. Gross power released is the sum of the muscular, inertial, and gravitational components of power production. So it's primarily during the downstroke. Gross power absorbed is the power that you're absorbing as you return the leg to the top of the pedal stroke. It too is composed of muscular, inertial, and gravitational components. So you can't assume just because power is being absorbed that someone is actively resisting the pedal, but nonetheless we can calculate how much power is being absorbed in a gross sense. Net power is the difference between the two. Since we're talking about gross power absorbed, that's actually being expressed as a positive number. So in order to calculate the net power, then you have to take the difference. Kurtotic index then is really just how peaked your pedal stroke would happen to be. So to try and give you an idea about that, I'm actually a decent candidate here in that I pedal asymmetrically, possibly as a result of a couple of hip surgeries resulting from a broken femoral neck 26 years ago. But here's a workout that I did recently on the trainer testing out some wearable sensors. I wanted to put them through their paces. The gross power absorbed by my left leg is shown here in blue. So you can see I warmed up on the trainer, I rode steadily for a while, then I did incremental exercise test, and then I recovered, and then started building back up again, finished off the workout, and then warmed down. So gross power released is from the left is shown in blue. The gross power released from my right is shown in red, and I think it should be pretty obvious that that my left leg is releasing more power than my right, although they tend to be converging at higher power outputs here. In terms of power absorption, you can see that my left leg is actually absorbing less power, and my right is absorbing more power. You can also see how that varies as a function of power output, in that I'm absorbing a little bit of power here when I'm pedaling steadily at, I'm trying to remember, this would probably would have been like, tempo effort. But then when you do an incremental exercise test and you start out at a really low intensity, you tend to be a lazy pedaler. So I actually absorb more power. But then with increasing exercise intensity, you tend to do a better job of getting that trailing leg out of the way of the rising pedal. So the gross power absorbed decreases, and if I actually start sprinting, it can go all the way to 0. And then finally, the kurtotic index up at the top, a measure of the peakiness. An average value here might be 4 for a typical person. Somebody who has a lot of fast twitch fibers, a sprinter who really punches the pedals, they might be up around 5. Somebody who's more slow twitch and pushes the pedals more might be, a little less than 4. Well, you can see that my left leg, the kurtotic index, which is over here on this axis, is 3.5, and my right leg is even lower, running between 3 and 3.5. So the sum total of all this, whenever I try and describe my pedaling action to people, is that I push with my right and I punch with my left. So it's push, punch, push, punch, push, punch. And it possibly or probably as a result of the fact that I punch that left pedal down harder is probably why I'm absorbing more power on the contralateral side. So when I punch that left pedal down, the right pedal rises up and smacks me in the shoe. So in reality, though, I'm probably more like push, 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 because even my left leg doesn't really punch the pedal very hard. Now, the other thing that is obvious when you look at this, though, is these dual-sided power meters. I mean, there's a lot going on, and so it's not uncommon to, have oddities, data dropouts, weird data spikes, and that kind of thing. So another way of looking at the same data is to plot it as a scatter chart, and then you can focus on where the vast majority of the points are, and even scale it or visually choose to ignore the extreme outliers that are just data artifact. This also allows you, in this case, plotting it against power on single-sided power, to kind of get an idea of how your pedaling action varies as a function of your power production. So this is the famous Zorro chart, so named, I think, obviously, for the shape that it frequently forms, at least if you have a wide range of power outputs. So the coloring is the same as before. This is single leg power, either left or right, and here is gross power released on the left side and gross power released on the right side. So this comes back to what I was saying before. The cursor was, when I took the screenshot, was at 118 watts. For me to make 118 watts net on the left side, I'm actually, well, on that particular data point, they're showing up the same, but you can see that there's I'm going to be releasing more power versus the right. Similarly, I'm absorbing more. The green points are above the pink points, if that's what you want to call that color. And then kurtotic index makes the top over here. So again, you see how I tend to have a peakier pedal stroke on the left-hand side, this kind of fleshy pink color versus the very light blue. And the other thing of note here is while gross power absorbed and gross power release vary as a function of power output, and here's that convergence that I was talking about. So they tend to converge in terms of power released at high power outputs. Ki tends to be not completely independent of power output, but it's pretty constant. So it ends up being a sort of a stereotypical pattern for someone, might be the way to describe it. We have one motor pattern going on there, how we pedal, and we use that same basic motor pattern and just amplify it or turn the volume down depending on how much power we need to produce. And then finally, if you want to get really fancy, you can actually combine these different ideas. And here is a bilateral power duration curve. So this is my the Ph.D. curve fit to my left leg or right leg power independently, so that I can actually calculate the P max for my left leg, the P max for my right leg, the FRC for my left leg, the FRC for my right leg, and the FTP for my left and my right legs. Never really thought about the fact that you had separate FTP for each leg, right? But this really does sort of show, I'm a slow twitcher to the core, but I'm especially a slow twitcher on the right, in that my Pmax is lower and my FTP is higher on the right side, whereas my left leg is a little bit less of a pure time trialist. And when you actually look at that, asymmetry, as I've joked, it's a wonder my two legs cross the finish line at the same time. Of course, obviously they have to. But it does provide another way of gaining additional insight into your unique abilities. In this case, sort of combining the biomechanics, the patterns of force power application while pedaling with metabolism, in that by the time you get out here, we're not talking about sprinting, right? So there's a metabolic effect that accounts for this difference here, or contributes to this difference here. And what's really interesting when you start thinking about this is the fact that my FTP of my right leg is higher than that of my left, and yet I choose to, or end up producing more power generally with my left leg at submaximal intensities. So it's as if my left leg is working all the time, and I could then dial up or down my right leg depending upon the overall demand. Now, is this the result of a couple surgeries, et cetera? Well, I don't have data from beforehand, so I don't really know. But it is consistent with isokinetic dynamometry testing I've done on myself, at least with my right leg. I'm an extreme slow twitcher on my right side. So like I said, those are different ways of trying to look at your individual physiology, leveraging the power duration curve, the mathematical model, but also some new pedaling metrics. And as Hunter talked about or mentioned, he's going to be doing a webinar delving into those in far greater detail in the very near future. Now I'd like to turn my attention a little bit to thinking about how you can use the abilities of WKO4 to gain insight in how you actually respond to training. So not so much a snapshot of where you are at a particular point in time, but how you change over time in response to variations in your training program. And for that, I was going to first start with talking about power duration history chart, something that I introduced in the webinars way back when and was immediately implemented by others. But now it's WKO4 is out there. So this is my, I call it comeback 2.0. So this is after I got back on the bike after compressing a vertebra and missing 5 months of riding or any exercise. The bottom is my model-derived FTP, which in yellow, which you can see is slowly climbing back up. The orange in the middle is my model-derived FRC, which is also climbing back up there. And then the the top in red is my calculated Pmax. So it's kind of gratifying to see that I'm slowly climbing out of the hole, be able to look back and realize, yes, I am making forward progress, even though it seems like you'll never get back to where you were. But the power duration history chart allows you to, get that 64,000 foot view of how your fitness changes in response to variations in your training program. And of course, you have to know what you did at different periods of time in order to interpret this. But it does give you a very useful tool in that regard, especially if you expand beyond just a single season, but start looking like what happens over multiple seasons. So here's my power duration history chart for the last 15 plus years that I've been using a power meter. And so you can kind of see, cyclic variations in FTP on season, in season, out of season, in season, out of season, blah, 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 blah. You can also see that there's a gradual downward trend in Pmax and more so probably in FRC. FTP is hanging in there pretty well, although if you actually do, put a linear regression on here, which you can do within WKO4. It's the SLR, simple linear regression function. You can plot a regression line on there. It is also tending to slope downward. To delve into this in a little bit more detail, though, back here I was focusing on TTing, and in fact I had my highest model-derived FTP of all time right in here of 308 watts. Whereas now I peaked out before I crashed my bike. I was down to like 294 or so. So I've lost a little bit. Actually, getting a little ahead of myself. The prior season here, I was focused on mass start racing and was doing everything, crits, road races, did some track racing. My goal was to win Best All-Rounder Award out in what's now the Mid-Atlantic Bicycle Racing for the 40 plus. So I had to be a bit more of a jack of all trades. So you can see my Pmax was at its highest of all time. My FRC was pretty decent. My FTP was up there. So that's about the closest I could come to being an all-rounder, although in reality, even back then, I was pretty much a one-trick pony. There's no way I was going to win a race in a sprint, except maybe from a small breakaway. Then the following season, after moving to St. Louis, decided to focus on the TT at Masters Nationals. So you can see FRC is not quite as high. Pmax definitely isn't as high. But FTP was the highest it could be. Then I took a year off from racing. And notice, unless you push it, FRC tends to fall back down again, right? Then I decided to take another shot at the TT at Masters Nationals, and I discovered that we were expecting our first child, and I had a time conflict. So decided I'd try my wife's event, the Pursuit, and I trained specifically for the Pursuit, and you can see my FRC peaked out about the highest it's ever been. I'm a TTer to the core, so didn't have a very good performance and decided I had to go back and try it again the next year. This was Colorado Springs at altitude, and then this was Indy. So those 2 seasons I was training for the Pursuit. Then I took a few years off and just, riding for fitness and not doing much racing. And then I believe it was right around in here that John Verheuvel asked me to take a shot at the 90-plus tandem TT record out at Moriarty in the speed challenge. So I had to work hard to get my my FTP back up as high as it could possibly be, but I didn't worry about Pmax, sprinting ability, or short-term performance. Then I decided that I devoted 30-plus years of my life to being strictly a cyclist. Maybe I need to do a little bit more for well-rounded health and wellness. So I actually took a couple years here in which I was only riding several days per week and lifting and doing plyometrics several days per week. So you can see my FTP drops down a little bit, but I'm an aerobic animal, so it's not going to go out the bottom as long as I keep doing something. But again, if you don't train it, FRC goes down. This is an off season, and then Hunter says, hey, you got to come out to do the training camp, and I had not ridden more than 2 hours at a time in 10 years, and I knew there was a really long day out there, and of course everybody's going for bragging rights, etc. So I knew I had to be as fit as I possibly could. So at this point I started training, I call it the unimodal training plan. Everything was in the sweet spot, level 3, level 4, etc. And that only, and I managed to push my FTP up to, like I said, up to model derived value. It was 294, and I think going up Thunder Ridge, despite backache, I think I averaged 285 or thereabouts. And I managed to complete a century that they talked me into doing the extra laps. Thanks, Hunter. It was a 7-hour ride, and the wheels didn't fall off. It was the first time I'd ridden more than 2 hours in 10 years. But then I managed to go out and crash my bike and actually have 5 months off. So as data rolls out the back of the 90-day sliding window, calculated FTP drops off, Pmax drops off, FRC drops off, and then you can see that I'm trying to build back up again. So this is the same data from the previous slide, just compressed into a very short time range here. Well, you can then use that data in other ways. For example, one question you might ask yourself is, well, what's the optimal CTL for me to train at, or for you to train at? We gave guidelines when the Performance Manager was first released, saying 100 to 150 as a ballpark range based on the experience at the time. As the decades have passed, I might now, with additional insight, I might say, maybe 90 to 140 instead of 100 to 150. But most people, if their CTL is less than 90 TSS per day, they know they're time constrained. They know they could handle more training if they only had the time to, challenge themselves. Whereas the number of people who can handle 140 and above for prolonged periods of time is limited. It's getting there. You're starting to play with fire typically. But what we're really interested in is, rather than these population guidelines that we've been operating with before, is we're really interested in trying to bring things down and make things more individualized. And WKO4 gives you the ability to ask those kinds of questions and explore some of these hypotheses. For example, is more always more in terms of FTP using the model derived. So this is combining the data from my build up to Hunter's training camp and then my comeback recovery here. So you can see I plotted them in the same color so you can't tell which points are which, but it's the time ranges were what I called comeback 2.0 and the unimodal training plan. But you can see somebody said, looked at this, who was it? Sam Callan, sharp guy. He says, Starship Enterprise. Viewed from the side, right? Up here would be the big disc. Here's the neck that supports it. Here's the body. Anyway, but you can kind of picture here. Yeah, there is a relationship. The more I train, the fitter I become. That is, as my CTL rises, so does my model-derived FTP. But it's not necessarily a linear relationship. There seems to be some bend in that sort of curve. And the interesting thing here is that for the past 10 years or so, probably, I'm lucky, even before I fell off my bike, I was lucky to get my CTL up to, in the summer, maybe I'd get it up to 90 TSS per day, just because I was only riding 9 hours per week. So I'd be in the 80 to 90 range, and if you had asked me before WKO4 came out whether I was, maximizing my fitness on that, I might have told you, yeah, I think I am. Not really sure, but I thought I was close. But here, as a result of going to Hunter's training camp, I actually pushed my my CTL up to maxed out at 114 TSS per day. And it seems that that did result in a slight further bump in my model-derived FTP. And so, like I said, this is the highest I've been in a number of years, and it's getting close to the, not that far off of the 308 that is the highest I've ever been, almost 15 years ago. But now I sort of have a, I have an deeper understanding here of the relationship between training load and my own personal performance. Another question you might ask yourself is, well, okay, as as my FTP goes up, what happens to my FRC? If you're doing mass start racing, there's some combination of abilities. Every individual in the race probably has some sort of unique combination there, and it's always the case of trying to play your strengths off against everybody else's weaknesses, and hope to be the first one across the finish line. So if you're doing mass start stuff, maybe maximizing your FTP may not be the best plan if it comes at the expense of short-term, too much of expense to short-term power. Some people have, based on simpler mathematical models, some people have mistakenly concluded that physiologically there must be an inverse relationship between performance at shorter durations and at longer durations. And while it's true that at the limits the adaptations required are different, and at some point, you don't have the time and energy and ability to recover to maximize all of your abilities at once. You don't necessarily have to have a trade-off. In fact, what they've been looking at, I believe, is just a mathematical modeling artifact as a result of overly simplistic model. There's a case study that I wrote up that's slated to be posted. Hunter's already got his up. Tim has one. I have one coming where I describe my wife's data leading up to her pursuit championship, and in there showing how both her Pmax, FRC, and FTP were rising simultaneously. And I have some of that data here later in this presentation. But in this case, it's my own data and looking across 15 seasons. And yeah, I don't know if you actually did a correlation coefficient where it would be, whether it be statistically significant or not. I imagine it would be given the large number of data points you have there. But nonetheless, if anything, the slope is positive. And that is, the fitter I am in terms of my FTP, it also means the higher my FRC tends to be. And this actually intuitively makes sense to me. I've always sort of known that, you know, the more I train, the bigger my legs become and the better I perform. I'm not one of these people who actually, you know, loses weight by training. Instead, for me, it's an anabolic stimulus. Whereas if I don't ride a bike, then I lose weight and my legs shrink and my performance goes backwards. So in your case, whoever you are out there, here's an example. You could do these kinds of explorations. You know, what is the relationship between X and Y when I varied my training in such and such a fashion? And finally, I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions here because I'm sure there will be some. And I always shortchange people on questions. But finally, I want to try and continue on and talk about how you can use WKO4 to think about how you should train. And again, to some extent, that's dependent upon what your goal events are, and only you know what those are, and the software can't know what those are. But there are analytical tools within the software that can help guide you. In particular, the individualized training levels. So this is just a screenshot of my current individualized training levels calculated off the power duration curve, and I'm going to talk about those in a little bit. But I also wanted to show this to sort of show how I manage my set FTP. Well, I guess I should say how I use the model-derived FTP to help me manage my set FTP. You know, modeling, as useful as a tool as it can be, is not necessarily perfect. So we made the executive decision very early on that we were not going to automatically push the model-derived values into further calculations, and instead leave it to the user to decide, okay, what am I going to set my FTP for to calculate TSS, etc. But this chart gives you the ability to sort of compare how you've got your set FTP and how your model-derived FTP is. And you can see I really don't like to micromanage my set FTP, so I never change it by anything less than 5 watts at a time. And you know, it's always a work in progress. You're both looking forward and looking back. So at the time here, the model-derived FTP started to go up, but then we took a vacation to Florida, and I was off the bike for like a week or something like that. It came back down again. I chose not to micromanage and put a little bump in my set FTP there. It's really the big picture is what I'm interested in. So that's how I've got my set FTP. But it's the it's the individualized training levels here that I really wanted to show and discuss. And then the question becomes, well, why do we need individualized training levels? You know, the classic training levels are anchored to FTP as a surrogate marker of the limit of metabolic control, which is evidenced by multiple physiological tests. You can, you know, use maximal lactate steady state. You can look at the breakpoint in muscle oxygenation using near-infrared spectroscopy. You can rely on a threshold in IEMG levels. You can use ventilatory or respiratory gas exchange measurements, all of which point to the same exercise intensity. And that is what I like to call your indicators of your muscular metabolic fitness, which is my counterpoint corollary to referring to VO2 max as your cardiovascular fitness, because it's really your characteristics of your muscle, particular how many mitochondria you have, but also fiber type, capillarization, etc., recruitment patterns that determine your metabolic responses to submaximal exercise and are the single most important physiological determinant of endurance exercise performance. So it makes perfect sense to use that as an anchor point when trying to define training levels. And as this graph shows, it actually works quite well down to relatively short durations. This is for the database that I have developed and keep adding to, but it represents close to 200 seasoned athletes, with their power being expressed as a percentage of their FTP. And what you can see is if you express it as a percentage of FTP, there's very little variation between individuals from, what is this, a log scale. So 200 seconds maybe, all the way out to, I think the longest file I have in here is 37 hours by a single individual. You can see the standard deviation bars, they start to blow up a little bit at this point because fewer and fewer and fewer people ride that long. And then by this point it's down to n equals 1, so there is no standard deviation. But the standard deviations here are not really visible because everybody is so similar once you account for their FTP. At shorter durations, however, that's where people differ. So on average, while people can produce 4 times their FTP while sprinting, some people it might be, I've seen up to 9 times for one individual, and other people it might only be 2.5 times. These then are the classic training levels, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, which are anchored relative to FTP. Level 6, historically, when it was introduced, isn't really anchored relative to FTP. It's just somewhere north of level 5. And of course, level 7, sprinting, isn't related to FTP at all, so it was just defined as sprinting. So the classic approach works quite well, levels 1 through 5, and it's only at the shorter end, though, that individuality starts to pop out. But nonetheless, this is a very broad range of power outputs here, where everybody is being treated equally. Well, once again, the power duration model gives us the opportunity to advance our understanding and application of training principles by producing individualized training levels, which are calculated based on landmarks on the power duration relationship. So we've gone from the 7 original training levels now to 9. So we still have level 1 recovery, level 2 endurance, level 3 tempo. Hunter now gets his level 4A sweet spot, level 4 FTP, but now we have level 5, which is sort of a hybrid. It's intermediate, so we're calling it FRC/FTP. So when you're training in this range of power outputs, you're having an impact upon both FTP and FRC. Level 6 is you might think of as pure FRC training. Level 7 is again a bit of a hybrid. At the shortest durations, your power output is high enough, you're likely to have some impact on Pmax, but you're also going to be going long enough that you're going to have some impact on FRC. And then finally, the upper limit up to level 7 is up to Pmax, right? So think of it as I put the words underneath the lines, so that from 0 up to here is level 1, from here up to here is level 2, etc. So this gives us a better ability to fine-tune training prescription, etc., and training description as well. We're moving a little bit away from pure prescriptive, but also to descriptive. So while time in zone calculations still have their limitations, in part because of the seemingly stochastic nature of power output during cycling, we still have at least a finer sieve in which to view the data here and have a better understanding. And so as I'm saying that now, I realize I probably should have put up a time in zone chart showing the difference between the classic distribution and how it is at the eye level distribution. So just to give you an idea of the impacts this can have, this is actually my data at the present time, my wife's data back when she was a pursuiter. And in particular, so let's just look here at the FRC range. I have a very low FRC, so I expend it pretty quickly, and I would be targeting intervals 377 to 481 watts, anywhere between 31 seconds and, you know, a minute 19. Now, you do have to keep in mind these durations represent for a single all-out effort at these power outputs. And that's one way of training your capabilities. But when you start designing interval training programs, you can manipulate work-rest ratios. For example, you know, you can train VO2 max by doing, you know, 30-second on, 30-second off intervals. So even though the duration is, you know, in these ranges, 30 seconds, because of the short recovery period, the power actually has to be lower, and that would be a workout more down in this range. But nonetheless, it does give you some useful guidelines. If I compare that, look at my wife's data over here, her FRC more than 2.5-fold greater than mine, the highest I've ever seen for a female cyclist. And you can see even if she goes all out in a kilo, she's just starting to tap her complete functional reserve capacity. So idealized or optimized FRC intervals for her would be longer in duration at higher power outputs than, especially at the top end, than it would be for me. Now, interestingly enough, she trained under one coach, a former Olympic team member himself, and the bread and butter workout that he would give her was between 4 and 6 2-kilometer efforts on the track. And trackies differentiate between the flying start, that is, you're circling the banking up high, and you ride downhill down the track to get up to speed, or a standing start. So he would prescribe 4 to 6 2-kilometer efforts from a flying start, you know, lots of recovery in between, at race pace or race velocity, which on an outdoor track like T-Town would take her about 2 minutes 50 seconds at a power output of 315, 320 watts. So then you actually look back at the now individualized training levels that we have, you know, some 13 years on, but you start to realize, well, the power is at the very lowest end of what is necessary to really maximize FRC in her case, and the duration is only in the middle. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's not all that surprising that she didn't make a lot of forward progress. Yes, these workouts would leave you feeling pleasantly tired, and yes, you know, you spend a lot of time practicing your, you know, holding a constant pace, etc. But they weren't a sufficient overload to induce significant adaptation. She then switched coaches to someone who had been world pursuit champion, and did a lot of time doing the horrible, what I describe as, you know, go hard, puke, go home type intervals, where she would be burying herself, utilizing all of her FRC, and then you know, recovering for a sufficient period of time, and then doing it again and again. And here's the results looking over the course of 3 years. So the first couple years here, and I apologize for, you know, the smallness of the font and the darkness of it when you take a screen capture, shrink it down, throw it on PowerPoint then. But you can see her Pmax is here in season, and the dip, and then, you know, here's in season again, and then here's like the 3rd year. Here's FRC and a dip, and here's FRC, and then here's the 3rd year. And then here's FTP, you know, a little decrease, FTP, and then the 3rd year. And so basically years 1 and years 2, just holding steady, making no great progress. Then switches coaches, switches her approach to training, which you now, if she'd had the eye levels at the time, would have been a much more obvious thing to do, I think. Optimize the training, and now you see, huge increase in FRC, nice increase in FTP, and appropriately, although she peaked out her FTP early in that season, appropriately when it comes time to shift your focus from base training, if you will, to specializing as a pursuiter. Well, FTP actually, or at least model-derived FTP, actually decreases. But all you're concerned about if you're a pursuiter is how much power you can make for, if you're a woman, 3 kilometers distance. So a very good outcome, commensurate with what you'd expect in context of the individualized training levels and how she had been training previously and then subsequently. So the summary, the thought I want to leave you with here is the fact that WKO4 is a very powerful tool with your ability to create all sorts of charts. If you can ask the right question, it gives you the opportunity to try and extract those answers from your data as actionable intelligence and learn more not only about your own unique abilities in physiology, but also how to take that information and prepare better for competition and hopefully achieve greater success. Now, I will turn to the questions here. I don't know if Hunter, you said you were going to step away. I don't know if you want to play moderator or not, but so the first question here is, my best age-adjusted score on the WAC chart is at about the 60-second mark. This is, however, a low point on my strengths and weaknesses chart. How is this possible? The explanation there is that the strengths and weaknesses chart, which I believe is one of the defaults, and you notice I didn't show it, I would have to go dig for it. The strengths and weaknesses chart is actually referencing you to the lower end of the pay scale, if you will. The reference is actually, I think, the middle of the so-called novice range, whereas the WAC chart is comparing you to what is a world-class performance. And in fact, the way the standards have been generated, the curve shapes are not identical. So this is one reason why we've got both of those out there. And sort of time will tell which one gains the most traction, I think, proves that to be the best approach. The next question is about kurtotic index. In particular, does it differentiate between the peak force versus the duration or degrees of travel? It's going to be dictated primarily by the peak force. But the reason I say it's not, we can, I'm stumbling over myself here. Another thing that we have implemented in WKO4 is a calculation of your maximum effective pedal force. So you may recall from quadrant analysis previously, if you have a single-sided power meter, it's possible to calculate the average effective pedal force. Well, now that people have dual-sided power meters, we can actually talk about the maximum effective pedal force. So that would be the peak force that this person was asking about. But it's best phrased as that is the peak or maximum effective force during your power producing phase, because most people produce power over more than 180 degrees. Variability in terms of how well people kick it over the top. Some people actually do start producing power before the pedal crosses the top of the pedal stroke at 0 degrees. Some people like me, it actually has to go 5 degrees past the top before torque power force become positive. But most people actually, it's across the bottom. Most people extend that out to maybe 200 degree point, give or take. So when we talk about maximum effective pedal force or kurtotic index, it's technically what's happening during the power producing phase and not just the downstroke, because the power producing phase is a little bit larger than the downstroke. And someone asked, is this chart available on Chart Exchange? They've asked it while I was showing a particular chart. The answer is probably not, because I'm way behind in uploading various charts. So hopefully we can rectify that situation. If people want to, send me an email, clamoring for specific charts, etc., that will certainly serve as a reminder. And someone is asking, is FRC is 30 to 90 seconds? FRC is the amount of work you can do during continuous exercise above your model-derived FTP. So it's really an area, and it doesn't fit a specific time range necessarily. If you looked at the correlation between FRC and just raw power at 1 second, at 2 seconds, at 3 seconds, et cetera, on out, yes, it would correlate well with 30 to 90 second power, at least across individuals. But it isn't really possible to fix it to a certain duration because it's an area. And then someone was asking where to find the phenotype charts. Your phenotype is, your auto phenotype is reported automatically in the left-hand explorer when you're at the athlete level. What we're still, like I said, expanding upon is how to report that information. The statistics allow us to tell you what's the probability you are a particular phenotype. We could expand phenotyping. Right now we just have 4 of them. We've talked about expanding it to the Briggs-Meyer sort of 2 level. So you could describe somebody as being, say, a T-tier pursuiter, whereas somebody like me is just a T-tier, T-tier. It's possible to produce phenotype maps, and I've done that with large numbers of athletes, and those can be kind of interesting, and look at different individuals, how they are in relation to each other on a map, or even cooler is the same individual over time as they try and change their phenotype by changing their training, try and navigate to a goal. But those charts are far more interesting when you're dealing with multiple athletes, and when you only have yourself, it often is just a single lonely data point, or maybe 2 or 3 on a big empty field. So we haven't implemented them yet. The phenotype report that I showed, don't know if that's up on Chart Exchange yet or not, but the expressions are available to you if you want to try and play with different ways of doing it yourself as well. And on that note, I strongly encourage anybody who wants to start experimenting with writing their own expressions in general means, share them and we'll see if we can get those up on Chart Exchange. And I unfortunately don't remember who it was. Somebody Hunter knows. Very quickly got up to speed, and they produced a really nice chart. If you remember the way back in the day, the classic power profiling, we have 5 second, 1 minute, 5 minute, and then an FTP column. Well, FTP can be either FTP, set FTP, if you're just filling out power profiling chart in Excel, or it could be something like estimated as 95% of 20-minute power. Well, there was actually a secret hidden switch in one of the earlier versions of WKO4 where you could flip the power profile chart and look at it the way you wanted to. And this coach had historically used 95% of 20-minute power, so he wanted to see the power profile chart that way. So he added a 5th bar. So he had 5 bars. The default chart that comes with WKO4 has 5 second, 1 minute, 5 minute, and set FTP. He added a 5th bar in between the 5 minute and the FTP, so he could look at all 5. So that chart is actually up on Chart Exchange. So if anybody has, wants to create some cool charts and share them, that's why Chart Exchange exists. And so I encourage people to go that route. And then here we have a question from someone who rides a recumbent, who wants to know whether the pedal stroke analysis would be confounded by a riding position where bottom dead center is at about 90 degrees straight out from you, as opposed to about 180 degrees. I hadn't really thought about that, so let me think for just a second here. No, the analyses won't be confused, but the data will certainly be different. And it would actually be very interesting if somebody somebody wants to email me a file, if they have they ride a recumbent and they have a true dual-sided power meter. I'd love to look at some of that data, especially if they could pedal upright as well for comparison. But remember, gross power released is gravitational, inertial, and muscular. And by riding in a recumbent or a semi-recumbent position, we've changed the gravitational, the orientation of the muscular vector relative to the gravitational vector. So actually how you pedal will be different, has to be, at least viewed through these eyes. So it would really be interesting to look at the data and see. It's going to depend somewhat on the actual power output, just to expand upon that a little bit more. Obviously the gravitational component just depends upon the mass of your leg, and that is independent of the power output, whereas the muscular component is really low when you're just soft pedaling, and it's really high when you're sprinting. So the muscular component becomes more and more dominant with increasing power output. But the gravitational component and the inertial component are always there. So it would be interesting. I love getting questions like this that I had not anticipated. It would be interesting to think about. And of course, somebody started the very first question was, and we have it here in the post questions as well, and that is, when's the PC version supposed to be out? And last I heard was 4th quarter, and things were still on target. But maybe Hunter, if he's still listening, if he wants to jump in, he can say more or not. Any more questions out there?
Andy, this is Tim. We're going to release PC by the end of the year. That's our target. We're always trying to improve upon that, but that is the target, and we'll keep everybody updated.
Hey, Tim. Thanks. No more questions? Tim, do you have a question?
Okay. No, fantastic job, Andy. You guys, we're going to be doing a next webinar next week on the 17th. Using this individualized data, we're going to drill deeper into how to train with it. So there will be a follow-up webinar, more focused on the coaching and how do we leverage this individualized data. Watch the Facebook side of the post for Training Peaks for it to come up. It'll be out shortly. I think it's on the 17th at 8 p.m., but check back and sign up and keep building on this. And I see, Andy, you have one more question if you want to answer it, but I'll go back to mute.
Someone's wanting to know if I can give them an FRC versus model-derived FTP formula. Could that be in reference to the scatter chart, the chart exchange? I'll bet you it is. So here we'll launch WKO4. Everybody should be seeing my WKO4. I think this is the chart that wanted to be seen. Not a lot of data the last 90 days, right? But in terms of how you actually get that, it's just a simple scatter chart. So this is the expression. So it's always X, Y coordinates. So we have model-derived FTP, and you notice the cool thing here is you can type in your own units, and WKO4 will remember them. It won't necessarily know to auto-assign the parameter of interest to your axis, and you may have to pick it manually. But I can actually, this isn't just watts. I'm able to sit there and say what it is. It's model-derived FTP measured in watts. But that's the X, FTP, mean max power, trailing 90 days. And that's the Y, FRC. So if we wanted to instead look at the relationship between my my FRC and my Pmax, oh, I have another data series here. We'll get rid of that one for now. And then, should we go for 15 years worth of data? Might take a while. 3,733 files being crunched. Oh, there you go. So this is consistent with what I've, what I've said, what I've always known about myself. It's basically the more I ride a bike hard, the bigger my legs become, the better I perform. So it's actually a positive relationship in my case between my Pmax and my my FRC. Of course, you would expect that if you looked across individuals, because the fast twitchers would tend to have a higher FRC as well as a higher Pmax. But it's interesting to see it even within a single individual. And if you wanted to throw a trend line on there, I'm showing off now, aren't I? I could just take that data series. I'm going to copy the whole thing. I'm going to add a new one. Okay. Hello. $15 years worth of data. Oh, I just deleted my data series, didn't I? Oh! I meant to hit the plus and I hit the minus. Here, put that one back. Now add another one. This is when you have a lot of parentheses. Kevin's recommendation is to work from the inside out. I actually sort of like to work sometimes from the outside in. So if I want to put a simple linear regression line on there, I'll often like type SLR in the parentheses, then I'll put my cursor in between and then insert my formula there. And we're going to go up and we're going to turn this back to circles. And then we're going to make that the right color. Oh, one suggestion. If you do get into making your own custom charts, there in the color chart picker, we do have a bunch of predefined colors, and best practices would be to use these whenever possible, because as I was pointing out to Hunter, it's like the customization here is fantastic, but it's going to kill Hunter, because Hunter's going to go around and give talks, and somebody's going to say, hey, come look at my data, and they'll have used all custom colors, and it's going to take him extra time to get oriented. So that was the point. We said, we need to predefine some of the colors. So if at all possible, please adhere to that, and that'll make everybody's ability to jump back and forth better.
Yeah, thank you.
So you can throw a simple linear regression line.
That's much appreciated. Much appreciated.
Yeah. I'm picturing a picture. You're like the chess grandmaster, Hunter, and you're having to walk up to the board and appraise the game at that instant, right?
Yeah.
And react.
Yep, pretty much.
So just think, and I actually play chess with my son, and he likes to on the Mac here, and he likes to use a chess set where I have a really hard time telling the black and white pieces apart. I think they're like gunmetal gray and they're in 3D and this kind of thing, and it's like I make mistakes because I get confused by that. So hopefully that answers the question out there about what that expression might be.
And hey, folks out there, I mean, what right now we're doing is we're collecting a new set of charts that we'll put on Chart Exchange. So a lot of these charts that Andy has built here and showed you that he's willing to share with everybody in the world, we're going to stick on Chart Exchange in the next couple of weeks. And also for all of you who are attending, if you guys have made really cool charts, then let me know. Just shoot the chart to me and Hunter at peakscoachinggroup.com, and then give me an explanation of the chart, and then hey, if it's good, I test it, makes sense, works, all that stuff, then I'll stick it on the Chart Exchange. So we're kind of trying to do second round of updates to the Chart Exchange right now. So look for some of these things coming out in the next couple of weeks. So hope you enjoy them.
Yeah, custom charting is fantastic. This, since we're still here, people can leave if they wish, but this is my own performance manager chart. So I'm compulsive, so I labeled all of my axes with exactly what they are. But then I've also thrown a couple of horizontal grid lines on here. I consider a TSB between -10 and +10 to be neutral territory. So greater than +10 would be a positive TSB. And you can see I got sick, missed a little bit of training, and so my TSB has gone positive. Whereas below -10, I consider to be a negative TSB. So I threw a couple of horizontal grid lines in there, and right now it kind of looks like, is it Jimmy Buffett about, just keep it between the navigational beacons or something? Holding steady is what it is. I think, what other charts here? Individualization. What kind of charts have I made? All kinds of charts. Better not let anybody see my secret charts, right? Oh, here's the one I didn't put up there. Time and eye levels versus time and levels. A lot of data points to classify. So at the top, Okay, so this is eye levels where I just have labeled 5/6, 6/7. So really should be, 7A and so on. But either based on average power, based on power, or based on normalized power. Since I'm doing pretty steady state type training, there isn't a marked difference in this distribution, but you'll notice that I get credit for time spent at these higher levels, but these are like really short bursts that, if you have 5 seconds here, 5 seconds there, it ends up adding up, but it's not really having the physiological effect that you think it would because it isn't sustained. Whereas if you use the normalized power approach to calculate time in eye levels, then it's a more realistic perspective. So that's one I should probably put up there, on Chart Exchange.
Hey man, let's put that one up there.
Well, that's all I have for this evening. What's that?
Oh, I don't even think you've shown me that one. I haven't seen that one. I want that one for my my chart picker.
Oh, you haven't seen that one?
No, that's great.
Oh, well, you can do all kinds of things, It's like, do you want to know how your W prime compares to your FRC? Yeah, you can do that calculation. It's kind of an ugly because it hasn't So while they're conceptually similar things, these lines stepping over each other is kind of confusing. Conceptually, they're similar sorts of things, but you can see if you're using W prime and just cherry picking a couple data points instead of using the entire curve, you can see how, even if you're looking back over a month, how it tends to bounce around a lot more. Whereas FRC, which leverages the whole curve, is steadier. Oh, what other charts? I've made lots of charts. Oh, here's one that I need to share. This is an NP Buster chart. It's a way of quickly finding files that qualify as NP busters. So it is looking at normalized power, your best normalized power for 60 minutes in every file, and that's shown in the red bars. And then this gray line up here is set at 105% of model-derived FTP. So operationally, and it's somewhat subjective, but it works. But if you consider the normalized power algorithm to be good, Gestalt plus or minus 5%, then anything that goes above that gray line would qualify as an NP buster. So with this chart, it's very easy to find if any such things exist. Although if I do all of my workouts for the past 15 years, I think I had 2 NP busters here. I have 1 NP buster in my life, right here. Only once have I ever been able to do it. So you can use this sort of a diagnostic chart, and then you find it, and then you can go and see what's up with that file. Or if you're somebody who is a sprinter phenotype, you're going to have lots of cases where you go above, because people who can produce NP busters tend to be able to produce them repeatedly. I'm just playing now if everybody wants to leave. Yeah, went too far. So has my wife ever produced an NP buster? Note that this is these NP busters are defined relative to your model-derived FTP. And the model is unbiased, and that means on average it gives you the exact same answer as 95% of 20-minute power, or looking at your long TT power. But it may sometimes err a little high and sometimes err a little low. So if it errs a little low, and then you compare your normalized power for 1 hour from, say, a Hilly criterion to a slight underestimate of your true FTP, you might generate an NP buster that you wouldn't have called it an NP buster if you'd estimated your FTP another way. But here you go, TT/pursuit or phenotype, nary an NP buster to be found. There's the closest right there. All right, well, with that, I guess we will conclude tonight. I appreciate everybody's attention. Any follow-up questions, email me. Happy to try and answer them.
All right, thanks everybody for attending. We really appreciate it. And again, we'll have some more webinars coming. We've got some great ones coming up, so keep tuned. Check out, if you haven't already, make sure you like the WKO4 page on Facebook. We put almost every day some tip on the WKO4 Facebook page, so it's a great way to learn, a great way to find out new tips, and as well when we have new webinars. So like that, and you'll be updated as we come out. Thank you, Andy. That was outstanding. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Hunter. Thank you.
All right. Y'all have a good evening. Goodbye.